I'm very happy to introduce Professor Elena Casetta. Elena is an assistant professor at the Department of Philosophy and Education at the University of Turin, where she teaches philosophy of nature and philosophy of biology. She works mainly on the species problem and the philosophy of biodiversity, with a focus on conservation sciences. Her latest book, edited together with Davide Vecchi and Jorge Marques da Silva, is From Assessing to Conserving Biodiversity, and was published by Springer in 2019. The title of the talk, of today's talk, is Has Climate Change Ended Nature? So please, Elena, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much, Tiziana, and thank you very much for inviting me to this seminar. Thanks, Erika, Francesco, and Fausto for the organization. Now, as Tiziana already said, the title of my talk today is Has Climate Change Ended Nature? Why I'm asking this? Because actually it has been claimed that since climate change is a global phenomenon, then something has changed in environmentalism, so to speak, in the sense that since anthropogenic climate change started, then we cannot speak of nature anymore, because there is no place on Earth which is untouched by human activities. Okay. Now, the fact is that the knowledge that human activities have an impact on climate is, of course, not a novelty. So we are going to see, let's see, some pioneers of this knowledge, and then we are going to see what changed. So how, allegedly at least, human beings ended nature, and then we are going to take the claim seriously. So we are going to see what can it actually means that human beings have ended nature. So let's start with pioneers. Probably the first one who suggested a connection between human activities and climate has been Alexander von Humboldt. As you probably know, Alexander von Humboldt was, let's say, he had a holistic view of nature. So he thought that everything was connected, and looking nature in this way helped him to see actually the connection between climate and human activities, and especially in virtue of his explorations, right? So he was probably the first to suggest that forests have an ability to enrich the atmosphere with moisture and its cooling effect. And he also warned that humans are meddling with the climate, and that these could have an unforeseeable impact on future generations. So we were at the beginning of 19th century, okay? And how he arrived at these conclusions, mainly because he was a naturalist, a philosopher, but he also was an explorer. So he spent 5 years in the Spanish America, and he could observe the effects of deforestation by the European planters. And then he spent in the last year, in the last exploration, he went to Russia, and especially in Siberia. And then he could observe the massive deforestation following the rise of intensive agriculture and around the mining centers. Okay, and if you, I mean, I found this picture, and that is a picture of 2021 still in Siberia, so situation has not changed a lot. There you can see deforestation after gold mining. And Humboldt pointed at 3 ways in which the human species was affecting the climate. Again, it was the 19th century. Okay, deforestation, ruthless irrigation, and the great masses of steam and gas produced in the industrial centers. Okay, so he already saw this connection, but it was Eunice Foote to the first who experimentally tested what we call today the greenhouse effect. He did so in a very short article entitled Circumstances Affecting the Heat of the Sun Rays of 1856. This is the article. It is 1.5 pages, so it is a very short one and very nicely written, an easy one to be read. And she writes, my investigation have had for their object to determine the different circumstances that affect the thermal action of the rays of light that proceed from the sun. Several results have been obtained, and here we are interested in the third. The third result is that the highest effect of the sun's rays I have found to be in carbonic acid gas. And she also claimed that an atmosphere of that gas would give to our Earth a high temperature. Now, this phenomenon, the phenomena underlined by Humboldt, were destined to increase together with the greenhouse effect tested by Foote. Okay, and here I'm going to follow mainly this book by environmental historians John McNeill and Peter Engelke, entitled The Great Acceleration. Okay, now according to them, there are two main reasons human beings ended to be a great force of nature. Okay, according to them, this process has been the process that brought to anthropogenic climate change has been, of course, a cumulative one, right? But there is a precise point in time in which a great acceleration began. Okay, and that point in time is 1945. According to them, that is also the starting point of the so-called Anthropocene. So, what are the reasons in general of that caused anthropogenic climate change? First is, of course, the massive increasing of human population. Okay, and the second is energy consumption and the related anthropogenic emissions of greenhouse gases. Why there is a question mark on related, because actually, of course, there is let's say a sense in which they are related. If human population increases, it uses more energy. But we also have to take into account that not every human being uses the same amount of energy and emit the same amount of greenhouse gases. Okay, it is the idea of ecological footprint or carbon footprint and so on and so forth. So what about population growth? We know that around 1800, there were just 1 billion of us around, and it had taken many thousands of years to reach that number. Okay. But by 1930, human population had doubled. And then in the span of one human lifetime, global population tripled from 2.3 billion in 1945 to 7.2 billion in 2015. So that is the great acceleration. Okay. And today, the world population is nearing 8 billion, but the trend is changing, so it is not increasing so much anymore. About the energy consumption and the related anthropogenic emission of greenhouse gases. In the late 18th century, human species shifted from an organic energy regime based on muscular force and animals, okay, to a fossil-based energy regime. Coal became the world primary fuel at the end of 19th century. Hence, oil took up the position in the mid-60s. And today, human beings use about 32 billion oil barrels each year. According to the Great Acceleration, this is a first in the sense that the burgeoning rate of energy use in modern history makes our time widely different from anything in the human past. And of course, burning fossil fuels and deforestation are the two main ways. There are others, okay, but these are the two main ways through which humans add carbon to the atmosphere. Okay, and if you look at the data, at the measurement of atmospheric CO2 that started in 1960, you can see that it is increasing. So situation is not improving much. So according to McNeil and Engelke, with the Great Acceleration, human actions began to interfere significantly with crucial biogeochemical cycles, affecting their capacity for self-adjustment and hence altering global climate. Not just according to them. I mean, climate change that there is anthropogenic climate change now is quite agreed upon. But they find in the Great Acceleration the historical period in which all this happened. And the result, so to speak, of the Great Acceleration has been summed up by Earl Ellis, who is an environmental scientist. And he writes, humans have emerged as a force of nature on this planet. We humans are going to shape the future of this planet. What kind of planet are we going to shape? He is, Ellis actually, he's one of the supporters of the view of the good Anthropocene. So the idea is that we are in the Anthropocene, but what we can do, so we have to realize that and what we can. So we need to, Anthropocene is not necessarily bad. The important thing is that we start shaping a better future for our planet, right? And, oops, sorry. And then there was, of course, the famous intervention of Nobel Prize Paul Crutzen in Cuernavaca in Mexico in 2000, when he at a certain point stood up speaking to his colleagues who were continuing to talk about the Holocene and said, okay, you have to stop speaking about the Holocene because we are now in the Anthropocene, okay? Just to be clear, that of Anthropocene is a proposal in the sense that it is a proposal that has also been submitted to the committee that decides whether it should be recognized a new geological epoch or not. The result is not there yet. But so if this is so if we look at at the extent of the anthropogenic climate change, the claim that we are at the end of nature makes somehow sense. Okay, and this is the book that it was published in 1989. And it is the first popularizing book on climate change. It had a lot of success, etc., etc. And yeah, the idea of Bill McKibben is actually that until a certain point, of course, human actions had an impact on the environment, but they were somehow local. Okay, think of pollution, etc., etc. So there were some areas on the planet that were still untouched by human activities, okay, and by by consequences of human activities, okay. But since anthropogenic climate change started, there is no more such places. So no place remains on Earth which is untouched by human activities. And so he declared the end of nature. Okay. Now, as I was saying, I'm going to take this claim seriously, as others have done. Why I'm saying that? Because you can also think of the claim that nature has ended as somehow, I don't know, like the heuristic of fear by Jonas. So this idea that if you imagine the catastrophic scenarios, the possible future catastrophic scenarios, then there is this helps you in deciding to act. Okay. No, I think that the claim can be taken seriously, and it shall analyze in that way. And in that sense, it has been it is a challenge to traditional environmentalism. Okay, why so? Because and this is Stephen Vogel in this book, Thinking Like a Mole. And he writes, after the end of nature, it seems there's not much for environmental thinking to do, except to mourn and perhaps to think about what was lost and why. For nature, once ended, cannot be restored. Okay, and why cannot be restored? Because if we think that nature is something untouched by human activities, then if we intervene to restore an ecosystem, we are not producing a natural object, we are transforming a natural object in an artificial one because we are intervening. And so in restoring ecosystems, we would just add more artifacts, okay, to the world. This is a criticism that has been moved to Restoration Ecology by Eric Katz in A Big Lie. Yeah. So the answer, one of the answers to this challenge has been the rising of post-nature environmentalism, okay? And Stephen Vogel is one of the post-nature environmentalists, okay? And I'm not going too much in, I'm not going much into this. I'm just going to give some example. And I think that what the shared attitude of post-environmentalists is the idea that you have to deal with it. So there is anthropogenic climate change, nature has ended. This doesn't mean necessarily that environmentalism is ended, so there is a lot of stuff to do, okay? But we have to shift the focus of action and policies and so on and so forth. So according to Stephen Vogel, for instance, the end of nature does not entail the end of environmental concern. And so he think of an environmentalism of the built environment, okay? And another example is Paul Wagner. And we can see the same attitude. In short, rather than become nervous, environmentalists should embrace the end of nature and take advantage of the opportunity it offers to become philosophically clearer and politically more effective. According to him, environmental advocates can no longer try to protect nature from humans. He's a critic, for instance, of reservation ecology that, according to him, does not work. Here, just a short parenthesis. In applied ecology, we can distinguish between restoration ecology, reservation ecology, and reconciliation ecology. Okay, so restoration ecology is when you try to, I'm oversimplifying, okay, but restoration ecology is when you try to bring a certain ecosystem to a previous state, so to a non-damaged state. Okay. Reservation ecology, and of course, restoration ecology has a lot of philosophically interesting problems, but this is not the topic here. So reservation ecology is rather when you protect a certain area that you think worth of protecting because of, I don't know, the high number of endemic species and so on and so forth, and you protect it by isolating it. Okay, so normally you, like in natural reserves or natural park, okay? And then you have reconciliation ecology. Reconciliation ecology is when let's say, is the attempt to make local communities, to improve the relation between local communities and ecosystems, okay? And according to Paul Wagner, restoration ecology and reservation ecology are not worthy in the sense that they cost a lot, okay? And often they do not bring the expected results. And so we should focus on reconciliation ecology. No, I quite agree with a lot of this. I think that a lot of these claims are extremely reasonable. Still, I don't know, I'm not ready to give up with nature altogether. And I'm not alone in this, I think, because the end of nature is not only a challenge to traditional environmentalism, but also a challenge to traditional ecology, okay? And to this challenge, but why? Because traditional ecology focused a lot on understanding and studying the functioning of so-called intact ecosystems, so on natural ecosystems, okay? And an answer to this challenge came from Earl Ellis, that I already mentioned. According to him, let's say, we should shift from nature conservation to managing anthromes, okay, where anthromes are anthropogenic biomes. So the idea is that they are no more, let's say, entirely natural biomes. They are just anthromes. They can be classified. We can study through time the impact of human activities on them, etc., etc. And we have to manage them. And this is the, if you're interested, there is the project there. But again, I think that it is not so easy to give up nature. And I'm going to say why. Making reference mainly to this very short article that is an editorial that went out on Nature in 2008. And here you can read, today there is no place untouched by man. A point made by environmentalist Bill McKibben, it is precisely because of humanity's pervasive influence that even the least changed ecosystems need help surviving in the future. The only alternative is proactive management by humans. But then it continues, okay? Because until here, more or less, it worked. It is like Earl Ellis, okay? But then it continues and it says, ecologists have conventionally studied the working of intact ecosystems, but have focused much less attention on how to keep them intact. Scientific research on the best ways to manage natural ecosystems need to become a much higher priority, but then there are natural ecosystems. So is nature ended or not? And I think that the natural artificial distinction is alive and well, both in people's minds, and there are research from psychology that show this, that we normally think of ourselves as a part of nature, but at the same time, when we think of nature, we think of something of something which is separated from us. Okay. And it is also alive and well in conservation practices and policies. Okay, think about the GMO debate. Think about the Convention on Biological Diversity. For instance, I'm just giving some example, but there you can see that the distinction between in situ and ex situ conservation is made on the basis of the natural habitat. So the idea of in situ conservation is when you conserve species in their natural habitat. Or think of the Habitat Directive, okay, which together with the Birds Directive form the cornerstone of Natura 2000. So in the Habitat Directive, conservation is defined as a series of measures required to maintain or restore the natural habitats. So what I'm gonna try to do is to find a third way, in the sense that I'm not entirely convinced with post-nature environmentalism, okay? And this is a sort of plan. As I was saying, I'm going to take the nature has ended claim seriously, and to do so, I will distinguish two ways of understanding the alleged end of nature, and I will analyze their consequences. And then in the conclusion, I will just suggest next steps, mainly two, and yeah, I will just sketch them. There will be matter for discussion, I think. Okay, since I'm alone and I don't see anyone, can someone just tell me whether everything is going, you can hear me, everything is clear? Is there any question until here? Can I continue?
I can answer for the other, because they can open the Microsoft
Okay.
the microphone. Yes, we can follow you
names.
very well, and we can hear and see the slides very well.
Good. Okay. It's yeah. It's a bit alienating, but okay. So let's start. Thank you. I'm reading the chat actually, so that is good. Thank you. Thank you. A lot of people. Nice, and a lot of friends. Hello. So first way, ontological reading. As you all know, ontology has to do with the world, its entities and processes. So if we provide an ontological reading of the claim that anthropogenic climate change ended nature, we will come up with something like this. Once there was something that we called nature, but that something does not exist anymore because of our activities, especially anthropogenic climate change. Oops, sorry. But what was it that something? Okay, what was that something that we called nature? Epistemological reading, as you know, epistemology has to do with our knowledge and especially our justified beliefs about the world, its entities and processes. Now, in the epistemological reading, the claim would be something like this, that our beliefs about nature have come to an end because they no longer reflect what nature has become. but we can then ask whether our previous beliefs were justified. And this is what we are going to do, okay? Let's start with the ontological reading, okay? What was that something that we call nature? And I'm gonna limit my analysis to the Western use of the word, not because it is the best one, but because it's the only one that I know. And I mainly make reference to two philosophers that I think shaped our view of nature. The first one is Aristotle, of course, because Aristotle gave the first definition of nature in both the metaphysics in the sixth book and in the second book of the physics, and John Stuart Mill in an essay entitled On Nature. Okay, what was it that something? And I think that there are two main possibilities following Aristotle and Mill. The first, that we are going to call 1A, is the technical understanding. So Mill called it that way. In the technical understanding, nature is what is opposed to supernatural. So for Aristotle, nature is the class of substances. Okay, nature for Aristotle has a lot of meanings. So I'm simplifying, and if there is a historian of philosophy can disagree with me, but I think that it can work. So for Aristotle, nature is the class of substances which have the principle of their movement and rest present in themselves. Okay, so in this sense, natural things are opposed to the unmoved motor. Okay, while the principle of movement can be understood as a principle of change. Okay. For John Stuart Mill, in a similar spirit, nature is the sum of all phenomena together with the causes which produce them that inhabit the non-supernatural world. Okay, so in the technical understanding, nature is what it is not supernatural, non-supernatural. Okay, but what happens if we endorse 1A? So if we read the claim of the anthropogenic, if we read the claim that nature has ended under the technical reading of nature, ontological technical reading of nature. Mill already gave the answer. In the sense of the word, nature, which has just been defined, and which is the true scientific sense, art is as much nature as anything else, and everything which is artificial is natural. Art is but the employment of the powers of nature for an end. Phenomena produced by human agency, no less than those which, as far as we are concerned, are spontaneous, depend of the property of the elementary forces or of the elementary substances and their compounds. The united powers of the whole human race could not create a new property of matter. So if we endorse this reading, it would be like saying that anthropogenic climate change is not much different from the great, there is a typo, sorry, the great oxidation event that happened like 2.35 billion years ago, and and it is when the ancestors of cyanobacteria started producing oxygen, and so the planet shifted from an oxygen-free atmosphere to an atmosphere with oxygen, and of course, almost all the organisms that couldn't breathe oxygen became extinct. That is probably the great oxidation event is probably the most catastrophic event in the history of the planet. Those are cyanobacteria, and this is these are traces that witnesses the great oxidation event. And so according to this view, human beings are more or less like cyanobacteria, and geologists from the future will find some traces in the rocks, witnessing the anthropogenic climate change. Now, of course, this is a fully coherent view from a scientific. This is fully coherent from a scientific point of view, but it is evident that such understanding doesn't leave, at least prima facie, much room for maneuver. Under this reading, the claim that anthropogenic climate change has ended nature would simply be false. Okay, nature is alive and well, and plus, if we want nature to do its course, since human beings are natural and their activity as well, then we should just let it be, because nature is a principle for change. So, but I'm going to argue in a short while that let it be attitude does not follow. Let's see the other possibility for the ontological reading of nature. Okay, both Aristotle and Mill recognize the second meaning of nature. Aristotle contrasts natural entities with those entities that are not supernatural, but that do not have in themselves the principle of change, which are artifacts. Okay, so as you know, okay, he compares a statue with a horse embryo. Okay, a horse embryo has the principle of change, that is the development from the embryo to the adult animal in itself, while on the contrary, a statue doesn't have it, because it is the human being that has to put the principle of change in the statue. Okay. And Mill recognizes that the technical definition of nature conflicts with the common form of speech, by which nature is opposed to art and natural to artificial. So there is a non-technical understanding of nature, and in the non-technical understanding, nature is what it is opposed to art, artifact, techniques, or what have you. Okay, and art is everything that takes place in virtue of the intentional or unintentional activity of humans, according to Mill's definition. Now, if we endorse this meaning, the claim that nature has ended is true, probably. Since because of climate change, no nature remains, because no place on Earth remains which is untouched by climate change. But what we can ask is whether the nature-artificial distinction is well-founded. Okay, and so why should we distinguish between nature and artificial stuff? And here the answer is not easy, because it depends on the ontological status of human being. It depends on whether you think that human beings are in nature or they are separated from nature, right? So I tried to make a sort of a scheme, okay? On the one hand, we can say human and their activities are part of nature, okay? And this is the let's say the technical understanding that we have seen, right? And the other hand, they are separated from nature. Okay. Now, normally, the idea that human beings are separated from nature takes the form of the claim that human beings enjoy a peculiar status compared to mere natural entities. So the idea is that they are natural, but they are different. Okay, they have something more. Okay. And this is the root of this are probably still in Aristotle, because in the Animal, he explained that human beings are made of matter and form, and so they are natural because they are made of matter, right? But their soul includes both an active intellect and a passive intellect. Passive intellect is, let's say, matter, okay? But active intellect is endless, is eternal, and it doesn't move, it doesn't change. So active intellect is what, let's say, put human beings on the same side of the unmoved motor, right? And continuing with the history of philosophy, I'm oversimplifying, of course, we can say that there are two ways of continuing this claim of interpreting the twofold status of human beings. One is more religious, so to speak. So human beings enjoy a peculiar status in virtue of some special relation with some supernatural being, as in religious narratives. Or they enjoy a peculiar state in virtue of their minds, okay, like in Descartes, for instance. But then there was the Darwinian evolutionary theory. And the Darwinian evolutionary theory showed that the presence of human beings on Earth can be explained without resorting to a creator. And it also explained that human mind is nothing else than the product of million years of natural selection conserving adaptive random mutations and discharging non-adaptive ones. And so that also human mind has nothing special from a biological point of view. But, and then we are back to square one, that we are part of nature. But if we are part of nature, then everything we do is part of nature, okay? And that is a claim made by Elliot Sober in a very interesting article, if you have the time to look at it, which is entitled The Philosophical Problems for Environmentalists. It has been written in 1986. And the distinction between natural and artificial has been included among the main philosophical problems for environmentalists, and I quite agree. So I'm going to give a first take-home message. So what we saw until here is that 1A is better founded than 1B. It seems to be better founded, at least to me. But saying that we are a part of nature does not imply that all we do is good, right? Because it is a very easy take-home message, a very trivial one. So like cyanobacteria, we and our activities are perfectly natural, but while cyanobacteria couldn't help producing oxygen, we can decide doing something to limit CO2 emissions, right? And so the let it be attitude does not follow necessarily from 1A, that is from thinking that human beings are just natural entities among others. The take-home message is that nature has nothing to do with norms, and that human beings and their activities are natural entities and processes does not imply that humans cannot change the course of their actions, of course. And we are going to go back to these two take-home. I'm going to give two take-home messages, and then we are going to say something more about these in the conclusive part. Okay. So let's go with the epistemological reading. We have analyzed the ontological reading, and we have said that there is also an epistemological one. Now, in the epistemological one, which is the one that in the second revised edition of the book, McKibben said to embrace, in the let's read directly McKibben. When I say nature, I mean a certain set of human ideas about the world and our place in it. But the death of those ideas begins with concrete changes in the reality around us, changes that scientists can measure and enumerate. More and more frequently, these changes will clash with our perception, until finally, our sense of nature as eternal and separate is washed away, and we will see all too clearly what we have done. Okay. So here, McKibben is referring to nature as wilderness, as is going to clarify in the remaining of the book. Okay. But wilderness is a very, it is a concept that has been criticized a lot from a lot of sides. I'm not going to speak about the criticism. I'm just going to focus on one, which is that wilderness is the result of a narrative, a not veridical narrative, and then that wilderness is a myth, okay? So what is a myth, according to Sauter Sarkar, who makes this criticism? A myth is a general story with normative implications, parts of which are known to be false. So that wilderness is a myth, let's say, is shared, and that the narrative behind the idea of the wilderness is a flawed one, has been shared by also Caroline Merchant and I don't know, Calicut and so on and so forth. So the lack of veridicality of the narrative lies in the claim that the places designated as wilderness have not been occupied by humans, that they are pristine. But these claims are generally false. And the paradigmatic example is, of course, European colonization in North and Central America, right? When the European colonization started, tens of millions of people were living there with a long history of interaction with the land. But then, mainly because of European originated illness, up to 90% of the indigenous population died. And here is again Stephen Vogel. Arguably, it was only because of this massive depopulation that it even became possible to view the North America continent as pure wilderness. The land seemed unpopulated by humans simply because they had died. So maybe we should, so if our view of nature as wilderness is a myth rather than a well-founded belief, then claiming that climate change ended the idea myth of wilderness would just imply the end of an unfounded belief. And so, in this sense, recognizing this fact may turn the epistemological end of nature into an incentive to proceed towards both a better, unbiased knowledge of nature itself and a better understanding of the relation between human beings and the rest of nature. How? That is complicated. So let's recap what we got until here. We started with the question, did Anthropocenic climate change ended nature? And we have seen two different readings, the ontological one and the epistemological one. We have seen that under the ontological reading, the claim would either be false, 1A, or unfounded, 1B. Under the epistemological reading, the claim would be true, but possibly beneficial. And this is good news. Because from an ontological point of view, nature has not ended, so we have time. There is more to do than just mourning its end. And from an epistemological point of view, some of our beliefs about nature have been proven to be false. Hence, we are in the position of replacing them with better ones. How? As I was saying, these are just, let's say, very sketchy proposals. The first one is the ontological one has a shape already. The epistemological one, not so much. But let's see the ontological one. As I was saying, I'm not so ready to give up with nature and nature artificial distinction, because I think it is so entrenched in our view of the world and in conservation policies and practices that it seems to be a bit unrealistic to do that. What we can do is rethinking that distinction. And in saying this, I agree with the environmental philosopher and philosopher of science, Sauter Sarkar, who says that even if humans are conceptualized as part of nature, we can coherently distinguish between humans and the rest of nature. There is at least an operational distinction. So it's, let's say, a less strong, but an operational distinction that is one that we can straightforwardly make in practical context. So we can distinguish between anthropogenic features those largely brought about by human action, and non-anthropogenic ones. Okay, so at least we can say, okay, it is problematic. It is one of the philosophical problem of environmentalism, but still we can do it in an operational way. How? There have been several authors who proposed to proceed towards a more dynamic view of the relation between natural and artificial. Okay, here I'm going to just mention one, which is that of Paul Engelmeyer. And the rethinking the distinction between natural and artificial is made through two moves. The first move is to shift from thinking of nature as a class of substances, so the class of all natural objects, so to speak, to a property. So started talking of naturalness, and such a property is a gradable property. So it is not a matter of yes or no, that a property that you have or you don't. It's a property that you can have in degree, okay? And it is accessible, okay? And his proposal is to assess it by means of 4 criteria. The degree of change, so think of a natural place, okay? And the idea is that a natural place is independent on human intervention. So these are the 4 criteria. The first is the degree of change expected if humans were removed. Second is the degree of sustained control, so how much you have to intervene in the area in order to make it function. Okay, and 3, the spatial extent of change brought by human beings, and 4, the abruptness of change. And so in the second move that follows from the first one is the shift from a dichotomy to a continuum. Okay, the dichotomy is natural artificial. The continuum is naturalness. Is that naturalness can be viewed as a continuous gradient with completely natural and completely artificial extremes. Okay, now the extremes are only abstractions. So entirely natural areas no longer exist, okay? But also entirely artificial areas probably do not exist because, I mean, there are trees. But some areas clearly are more natural than others, okay? And criteria, so the criteria allow assessing the degree of naturalness and the completely natural extreme, while an abstraction can be a sort of regulative principle for restorative policies and practices. And second step, concerning epistemology, as I was saying, I just thought of that this morning. So if I'm wrong, just tell me. If you think I'm wrong, just tell me. As I was saying, we are in the position of discarding some false beliefs about nature and replacing them with justified beliefs, okay? At least more justified. How? Looking at reliable epistemic sources. Yeah, okay, so which ones? Giuseppe Feola, bye, thank you for coming. But one possible suggestion is looking at first-hand sources. For instance, why not, I mean, we could learn about so-called wilderness, not looking at traditional wilderness narratives, but reading books from people who were there, and like the book Land of the Spotted Eagle by Chief Luther Standing Bear. It's a very interesting book. We can look at environmental history, because actually, for instance, when we learn about environmentalism, we learn US story, okay, in the sense that environmentalism, I mean, the conventional date of environmentalism is considered to be in 1962, with the publication of Silent Spring by Rachel Carson, great book. But European natural environment is quite different from American natural environment. Why? Because European natural environment has been anthropized for much longer. So while let's say in the US, you can think of nature as wilderness. Normally in Europe, you think of nature as countryside. Okay, and this is this makes a huge difference. And in Europe, for instance, the establishment of parks and reserves is generally conceived in a less rigid way, and the conservation of nature is often placed side by side with that of cultural heritage. For instance, I was curious, so I went to look at the first Italian preservationist law, which was written in 1922, which was approved in 1922. And it is written that the first article reads that are declared subject to special protection the immovable things whose conservation presents a considerable public interest because of their natural beauty or their particular relationship with the civil and literary history, the scenic beauty, that is a bad translation, the landscape beauty, because it is a paesaggio in Italian, are also protected by this law. So since we are going as, let's say, post-nature environmentalists say, towards a more and more built environment, maybe the European environmental history and policies can be of inspiration, positive or negative, I don't know, for let's say, next environmentalism. And I think that's all. Okay, thank you very much for the patience I took. Yeah, thank you very much.
Here we are. Thank you, Elena, for this fascinating talk, which was very rich on the historical point of view for the reconstruction of the first part of your speech, and also from the theoretical point of view when you discussed the question of the end of nature. I just have a comment, not. Are you there?
Yes, I'm trying to. Okay. Sorry, I'm trying. I stopped sharing video, and now I'm here. Yes, and
okay.
I'm listening.
Okay, I have just one short comment and a curiosity, probably. The question of the end of nature is very close to another philosophical question, a little bit classical, I would say, which is the topics of the end of art, or about the end of art. As you know, between the first philosopher who mentioned, not directly, but in some sense mentioned the question of the end of art in the aesthetics, was Hegel. And probably for Hegel, the question of the end of art was something real in his system. And the other one, more recently, was Arthur Danto, who tried to justify the notion or the topics of the end of art. It's a curious in some sense, because the question of art return in the second part of your talk, when you mention Mill, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
So the curiosity is about the connection of these two paradigmatic approach. Something of the end of art, of the cultural debate about the end of art, was used in your debate or not? That's just historical curiosity. That's the first point. Okay.
Okay. Okay. Short answer. No, in the sense that, as far as I know, or as far as for the things that I have read, there is this idea that natural objects can be considered as work as artwork, and that there are a lot of similarities between the two of them. Okay, think about the fact, for instance, that for the work of art, the originality is important. So you want the original, you don't want a copy, right? The same holds for, I don't know, a native forest. You don't want a copy of that. You want that the pristine native forest. Okay, you think that it is more valuable, the original, than the copy. Okay, and then you also have the maintenance, for instance, so the fact that through time you can, let's say, intervene a little. Okay, for instance, you can restore artwork, and you can restore an ecosystem without that work of art or that ecosystem losing its identity. Okay. As for the end of art, now if nature has ended and art has ended, so that becomes complicated. We are left.
The nice point is that art is still alive, so we don't have the problem. The metaphor is not useful. Is a bad metaphor in philosophy, you can say now.
Yeah, no, what I was more seriously is, in a way, I mean, I think that, yeah, I tried to take seriously the claim that nature is ended, okay? And I think that you can do the same with the claim that art is ended. But if you take it seriously in a literal way, probably it's just not true, right? So it is more a provocative claim or a way. I mean, I think that there is a similarity in the sense that both claims want to denounce a radical change. Okay.
Yeah, a radical transformation of the ontological of both paradigms.
Yeah.
On the ontological one and the epistemological one. This is true at least for the Dantean approach.
Yeah, and
the
in
notion
that sense,
of
I agree.
The end of art.
Yeah. Thank you for the thank you very much.
Okay. Others? I'm sure that someone would want to intervene. I just have to see. Okay, Erika, can you open the microphone of Maria? Because
yes.
Now you can. Great.
I activated her audio, but I don't know why. Can you talk, Maria?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Hi, Maria.
Do you have a question? Because
No, I don't know if because it's the first time that I'm using this this platform, so I don't know if I did something wrong here. Sorry.
Okay, sorry, you raised your hand, but maybe it was just a mistake.
Okay. Oh, okay. Sorry.
Okay, no problem. Are there any other questions? Okay, Lara, I'm activating your microphone. Okay. You can talk.
Can you hear me? Okay. Hello, and thank you, Elena, for this talk. It was very interesting. And I have a little question, which is related to my project. So I would like to know your opinion about it.
Okay.
So regarding the implications for ecology and also applied ecology of the framework that you presented in this seminar, do you think that this idea of naturalness could be useful for having a shift in ecology or in applied ecology from an ecosystem-based view towards a socio-ecological one. So to consider not merely natural system, but considering systems that are both social and natural.
Yes, thank you, Lara. Yeah, absolutely, I think so, in the sense that I think that this kind of theories, this attempt to make the distinction more dynamic and to consider naturalness as gradable property and a property that can change through time. For instance, a certain place can be more natural at a certain time and less natural at another time, is a very, how can I say, is those are effective views in the sense that they can help both they can help in keeping together the three aspects of applied ecology, I think. So if at a certain point I've said that often post-nature environmentalism, let's say, focus more on reconciliation ecology. Perfect. The reconciliation ecology is great, but we can keep all the three aspects together, right? So we can decide that a certain place must be restored, that another place must be isolated, and then that another place can be a subject for reconciliation interventions. And in that last case, I think that we are shifting towards socio-ecological systems perspectives. I don't know if I answered in a satisfactory way to your question. Hope so, because I can't hear you or see.
Yes, I activated my microphone again. Thank you. And yes, you answered. Thank you. And I also agree with you that it can. This framework can help not to necessarily choose one framework of action in ecology, so restoration or conservation or reconciliation, but to decide on each time according to the degree of naturalness we have to manage. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think that every case should be considered. I mean, we should consider one case at a time. So a certain place, we should. I think that we should probably focus on places, as Sarkar claimed, and I think that since each place is let's say, a concrete individual, so it is the unique result of its evolutionary history. So we should decide for every place what we want to do. We as ecologists, I'm not an ecologist, so what I was saying, we as human beings. Okay. So thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Lara. Are there other questions? Oh, yeah, there's a question in the chat. Matteo, do you want that I read your question? If you want, I can activate your microphone. No, I cannot use my microphone. So, Elena, I will read the Matteo's question. Thanks for your talk. I don't know if this is a proper question. I appreciated the point where you say that we should not consider nature as a continuum. Which do you think?
No, we should.
We should not consider. Yeah, he says that we should not consider nature as a continuum.
Okay.
However, maybe no, we should. Okay, it was just a mistake. So okay. Then he asks, which do you think is the place of agriculture in this system? I have the impression that agriculture is generally ignored in nature debates. If you think about environmental impact debates, generally people believe that the less agriculture, the better. Is there a way to reintegrate it into this system?
Yes, Matteo, it's it's a very interesting and important point. In the sense that, as I was saying, I think that the idea of naturalness as a gradable property can help, but in that sense, also the anthromes of Earl Ellis can take into they take into account well agriculture. Now, about agriculture, what I think is that the direction is the following. The point of agriculture is not much the distinction between natural and artificial, in the sense that we quite agree that agriculture, is natural, even though it's made by us. Quite. It depends, of course, on the type of agriculture. Why agriculture is considered to be a threat and somehow a threat. Sorry. It is because agriculture has among its consequences deforestation and biodiversity loss. Okay, so a certain kind of agriculture, as it often happens, right? So a certain kind of agriculture is an incredible damage for biodiversity. Okay, well, on the contrary, for instance, urban environment are often useful for increasing biodiversity. This is weird. I read this article, which is very interesting, of a research made in Germany. And I take the chance of saying hi to Tina Heger. Thank you very much for being here. In that research, they compared pollinations in agricultural area just outside, I think it was Berlin, but I'm not sure, okay? And pollination within the city, okay? And they discovered that in the agricultural areas, the pollinators were not so effective like in urban environment, especially bees. Why? Because the bees are smart, okay? So they can adapt in a short amount of time. And because in the cities, you can find botanical gardens and flowers in our balconies and terraces, and there is a lot of diversity, actually. While on the contrary, in the agricultural landscape, you normally have a very little biodiversity plus pesticides, etc., etc. So the point is, again, we also in that case, I think that let's say a view of naturalness could be adapted, so to speak, to take into account different kinds of agriculture, for instance. So we could proceed towards an agriculture which is more attentive to maintain biodiversity, I think. But today I'm very optimistic. I don't know why. Thank you for the question, Matteo. It was, I think it's, you raised an important point. Thank you.
Thank you, Elena. I have a kind of follow-up on this, if there isn't any other question. Okay, I'll go. Quite related to agriculture, quite related to agriculture. I think that this is not really a question, it's a kind of suggestion. I think that another place where it's really interesting, the idea that we should shift from a dichotomy between the nature and the artifactual to a continuum, so a more continuous conception of these two poles, is the field of food. Because, for instance, we usually think that food is something quite natural because we all eat, not just we human, but all animals have some kind of necessity to have energy, and so they eat. And also from the point of view of Aristotle, if I recall the definition of Aristotle of natural entities, those are those who has some internal principle, intrinsic principle of generation and change. And so animals, they seems obvious. Well, this is quite obvious because the primary example of natural entities were organisms for Aristotle. So they were obviously natural entities. But if we think about all the species that have been artificially selected, they have been modified and selected and changed by human activities. And so I think that not just animal species, but also a lot of plants. I mean, probably most animals, I mean, if we think about the number of animals that are alive today, the number of mammals, for instance, 60% of living mammals are animals that we use for food. So all these animals that are artificially selected, what are they? Are natural? Are artificial? So I think that this distinction should be clearly reshaped. This is a really interesting point, and I'm really sympathetic with this idea. And thanks again for the talk, because it was really, really interesting.
Yeah, thank you, Erika. Of course, the debate on food is extremely interesting. Again, especially from the point of view of two topics, so to speak. One is, as I said at the beginning, as I said at a certain point, the GMO debate, right? And connected to this one is, should we include modified food within biodiversity, for instance? Should we include them? And in that sense, you could also conserve them, because, for instance, we produced a lot of varieties through time, a lot of, for instance, new vegetal varieties, new animal races, etc., etc. And we also lost a lot of them because their maintenance is clearly dependent on their success on the market. Okay. So there is a debate on that. And yeah, I never thought about applying the naturalness, but I think that, yes, why not? I think it is a very useful and malleable way of thinking about naturalness. Of course, it is empty if you don't provide criteria. It is for that reason that I mentioned at least the Engelmeyer criteria, and probably you can also provide different criteria according to the different field of application. So I think that in that, I mean, I think that there is some work to do in that direction, and I think that that is a promising way. So thank you, Erika.
Thank you. Okay, are there any other questions? Okay, I'm not seeing raised hands nor messages in the chat, so okay. Oh, okay. Here there's a question. Do you want to talk, or do you want that I read your question?
I read the question.
Okay.
So what I think about the debate on intrinsic and instrumental valuation of the natural environment. What I think about that. If I'm gonna be sincere, I think that for conservation purposes, it doesn't matter so much. Okay, why? Okay, so on the one hand, you can think that natural environment. Okay, I can understand. Speaking of intrinsic value of a species, for instance, or of an organism. Okay, but about a natural environment, I'm not so sure that we can speak of intrinsic value. Why? Because if you think about what could be the intrinsic value of an environment, okay? And I'm sorry, because I'd like to, I'd like to have a dialogue on this, probably because I don't have a good answer. And so having a dialogue would be easier for me. But in a short, the short answer is that from the point of view of conserving an environment, the fact that the fact that we attribute to it an intrinsic value or an instrumental one doesn't change so much, right? You can conserve it because you think that it has an intrinsic value, so a value per se, okay? Or because you think it has an instrumental value, so a value for us, or maybe also for other species, right? And I can, while I can see the kind of instrumental value that you can attribute to a natural environment, for instance, I don't know, aesthetic value or scientific value, of course, economic value, natural resources, etc., etc. You can also speak about spiritual values, when you enjoy a natural environment, okay? But about the intrinsic value, so the idea that a natural environment is, I don't know. I think that I have to think about that. So thank you for the question, and it would be, yeah, I really have to think about that.
Okay, thank you. Are there other? Okay, there's a.
I'm asking this mainly to indicate that, sorry, I'm reading. I'm asking this mainly to indicate that intrinsic value would mean that nature cannot be ended. Nature cannot be ended it shouldn't be ended. So you mean if nature has an intrinsic value, then we shouldn't end nature? Yeah, I agree, but I also agree that even if we attribute an instrumental value, we shouldn't end nature because because we would lose something. So in that sense, I think that it doesn't change so much for conservation purposes. What can change in attributing intrinsic value rather than instrumental value is our attitude, our behavioral attitude towards something, okay? Because if we attribute an intrinsic value to something, we normally respect it more, okay? While on the contrary, if we attribute just instrumental value, not necessarily we respect it. It depends on which kind of instrumental value we attribute. For instance, if we attribute a spiritual value, probably we will respect that thing. But if we attribute an economic value, like thinking of nature as a class of natural resources, we probably wouldn't respect it. We just would use it. Okay, we exploit it. We would exploit it. So I think that attributing a different value to nature, so intrinsic or instrumental, can change our attitude towards that thing. I don't know if I answered to your question, and if I understood well. Thank you. And the better, oh, I don't know. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. If there aren't further questions, I think that we can, end the seminar. So, okay, Tiziana and Dina have to go. So I thank very much Professor Casetta. Thank you, Elena, for your rich and brilliant presentation. Thank you, everybody, for being present and for your question. And maybe Francesco can help me suggesting what's the next seminar. We cannot hear you.
Sorry, just unmuted myself. The next seminar on track is planned on the 4th of March. The talk will be delivered by Antonello Provenzale from the Siena Research Center. So we welcome, we wish everybody of you can be willing to take part to this seminar as well. And I also thank Fausto Corbino for helping and supporting us in the organizational stuff. And I'm very glad that so many people from different countries and institutions took part in this talk. And thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Thanks again.
Thank you all for inviting me, and thank you guys for listening to me and for your questions, etc., etc.